The island appeared on the horizon like a jewel rising from the sea. As the yacht approached the private dock, Ellis held her phone high, capturing the pristine waters and white sands that would be their retreat for the next 7 days. Her husband Bruce, dressed in crisp linen, beamed with satisfaction, while their children, Emma and Derrick, sat at the back of the boat, glued to their phones, barely glancing at the island. "Put your devices away and look at this place," Bruce called over his shoulder. "This is paradise." Emma rolled her eyes but pocketed her phone. Derrick, however, remained absorbed, tapping furiously on his screen. "This is going to be so boring," Emma muttered as she leaned closer to her brother. "Who vacations on a deserted island anymore?" "It's not deserted," Derrick replied, finally looking up. "It's just exclusive. Dad probably spent a fortune on this place." They disembarked to a small welcoming committee of staff dressed in crisp uniforms. The island manager, a tall man with sharp features named Mr. Harrow, greeted them with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Solara Island," he said smoothly. "Everything here is at your disposal, well, almost everything." "Almost?" Bruce asked with a raised eyebrow. "The southern jungle," Harrow explained, gesturing vaguely toward a dense green canopy in the distance. "That area is off-limits for your safety. The terrain is treacherous, and there's no need to venture there." Bruce chuckled. "Don't worry. We're here to relax, not go exploring." Emma and Derrick exchanged a glance but said nothing. The family was escorted to their luxurious villa, a sprawling structure with open-air rooms, infinity pools, and every amenity imaginable. While Bruce and Ellis marveled at the architecture, Emma and Derrick slipped away to explore. The day passed uneventfully, with Bruce and Ellis lounging by the pool while the staff attended to their every need. Emma and Derrick stayed in their rooms, alternating between boredom and irritation. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner under the stars, Mr. Harrow approached with a bottle of champagne. "To a wonderful week," he toasted. "If you need anything, simply ask." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Derrick stared out toward the dark outline of the forbidden jungle. "What do you think is out there?" he whispered to Emma. "Probably nothing," she replied, though a shiver ran down her spine. Neither of them noticed Mr. Harrow watching them closely, his smile faltering for the briefest moment before he disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, the island was bathed in golden light. Bruce and Ellis were enjoying breakfast on the villa's veranda, marveling at the ocean view. Derrick and Emma sat nearby, their expressions a mix of boredom and resentment. "I think today, we'll explore the tide pools," Ellis announced, sipping her coffee. "They're supposed to be stunning." Derrick snorted. "Wow, thrilling." Ellis shot him a warning glance but said nothing. After breakfast, the parents departed, leaving the twins behind. Alone in the villa, Derrick turned to Emma. "We should check out that jungle." Emma frowned. "You heard what the guy said, it's off-limits." "Why do you care anyway?" "Exactly because it's off-limits," Derrick replied, his voice low. "They're hiding something. Come on, aren't you curious?" Emma hesitated, biting her lip. She had a nagging feeling that stepping into the forbidden jungle was a bad idea, but the allure of uncovering a mystery was hard to resist. By midday, Derrick had convinced her. They packed a small bag with water bottles and snacks, leaving a note behind in case their parents returned early. "Just a short hike," Derrick said as they approached the edge of the jungle. The air here was thicker, cooler, and smelled of damp earth. The sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows on the ground. As they stepped into the jungle, the sounds of the island changed. The gentle crash of waves faded, replaced by the chirping of unseen birds and the rustling of leaves. Emma clutched her water bottle tightly, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. "Relax," Derrick said. It's just a forest. They wandered deeper, following what appeared to be an overgrown path. Twisting vines and gnarled roots made the trek slow and treacherous. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing where ancient stone structures stood partially hidden by moss and foliage. "What is this?" Emma murmured, stepping closer. The structures appeared to be ruins, their carvings worn by time but still faintly visible. The designs were intricate, depicting figures in ceremonial poses, surrounded by jagged shapes that could have been flames or waves. Derrick snapped a photo on his phone. "Told you there was something out here." A sudden rustling in the bushes made them both freeze. Emma grabbed Derrick's arm. "Let's go back," she said urgently. Before he could respond, a low, guttural sound echoed through the clearing. It wasn't like any animal they had ever heard, a mix of growl and chant, otherworldly and haunting. "Run," Derrick whispered. They bolted back the way they had come, but the jungle seemed to twist and turn unnaturally. The path they had followed was gone, and every direction looked the same. Emma's breath came in sharp gasps as she tried to keep up with her brother. "Do you even know where you're going?" she yelled. "No." Derrick shouted back. The sound came again, louder this time, closer. Whatever it was following them. As darkness began to fall, the twins stumbled into another clearing, this one dominated by a massive stone altar. Derrick stopped abruptly, staring at the structure. Emma grabbed his arm. "We have to go." But Derrick didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the altar, where the faint outline of a figure seemed to emerge from the shadows. The figure near the altar moved, stepping into the dim light of the clearing. It was cloaked in tattered fabric, its face obscured by a carved wooden mask. The intricate patterns of the mask matched the ancient carvings on the surrounding ruins. Emma's grip tightened on Derrick's arm. "We need to go. Now." The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at them. From the jungle around the clearing, other masked figures began to emerge, silent and deliberate in their movements. Derrick grabbed Emma's hand, yanking her back toward the forest. "Run!" The twins plunged into the dense underbrush, ignoring the sharp branches that tore at their clothes and skin. The sound of footsteps pursued them, rhythmic and unrelenting. "This way!" Derrick yelled, veering to the left. Emma stumbled but managed to keep up. Her lungs burned, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might drown out the sounds of their pursuers. They burst into another section of the jungle, darker and even more overgrown. "Derrick, stop!" Emma gasped, doubling over. "We can't just keep running. We're lost." Derrick looked around wildly, his chest heaving. "We can't stop, Emma. You saw them. What the hell were those things?" "I don't know," she snapped, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "But running in circles isn't helping." A low chant began to rise in the air, faint but unmistakable. It came from all around them, as if the forest itself were alive and closing in. Emma shuddered, her eyes darting to the shadows between the trees. "We need to hide," she whispered. Derrick nodded reluctantly. They scrambled up a nearby incline and found a cluster of large boulders. Crawling into a narrow crevice, they pressed themselves against the cold stone, their breathing shallow. The chanting grew louder, and the glow of flickering torches became visible through the trees. Emma peeked out from their hiding spot and froze. A procession of masked figures was moving through the jungle, their torches casting eerie shadows on the foliage. Derrick leaned closer. "They're looking for us." "No kidding," Emma hissed. The figures stopped near their hiding spot, their masked faces turning slowly in all directions. Emma clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle her breathing. One figure stepped closer, its torchlight illuminating their hiding place. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, praying they wouldn't be discovered. A sudden roar erupted from deeper in the jungle, startling the masked figures. They turned sharply, their attention diverted. The chant stopped, replaced by guttural cries that sounded like a mix of anger and fear. "What was that?" Derrick whispered. "I don't want to find out," Emma replied. Taking advantage of the distraction, the twins slipped out of their hiding spot and moved quietly in the opposite direction. They walked for what felt like hours, the jungle growing eerily quiet around them. Eventually, they stumbled into a small clearing where the remains of an old campsite lay abandoned. Rusted cooking pots and rotted fabric littered the area, and a tattered journal sat atop a moldy wooden crate. Derrick picked up the journal and flipped it open. The pages were brittle, but the handwriting was legible. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "They came in the night, silent and swift. We thought we could reason with them, but they have no mercy. We should have listened to the warnings. This island belongs to them, and we are trespassers." Emma's blood ran cold. "What does it mean?" Derrick turned to the last entry. "If you find this, leave. Do not try to fight. Do not try to hide. They always find you." The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Emma grabbed Derrick's arm, her voice trembling. "They're coming." The twins barely had time to react before the figures emerged from the jungle once more, their torches blazing brighter than before. The glowing torches surrounded the clearing, their flickering light casting ominous shadows on the twisted trees. Emma and Derrick froze as the masked figures emerged, silent and unyielding, their movements synchronized and deliberate. "Run!" Derrick whispered, grabbing Emma's arm. But as they turned to flee, one of the figures stepped forward and raised its hand. The twins stopped in their tracks as the chanting began anew, low and rhythmic, vibrating through the air. "What do they want?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the eerie hum. Derrick shook his head, clutching the tattered journal in his hands. Maybe they want us to leave. They're blocking every way out," Emma hissed. The lead figure gestured toward the altar at the center of the clearing, its hand beckoning. Emma and Derrick exchanged a terrified glance. "They want us to go there," Derrick said. "Are you insane?" Emma snapped. "We're not going anywhere near that thing." The chanting grew louder, and the torches' flames flared higher, casting the clearing in a fiery glow. The figures began to advance, herding the twins toward the altar. Reluctantly, they backed away, their steps faltering as they moved closer to the ancient structure. As they reached the base of the altar, Emma noticed something carved into the stone, a spiral symbol surrounded by jagged lines, similar to those on the ruins they had seen earlier. Derrick ran his fingers over the carvings, his brow furrowed. "This is some kind of ritual site," he said. "No kidding," Emma replied, her voice shaking. One of the figures stepped forward and placed a small object on the altar. It was a bone knife, its surface polished to a gleaming white. The figure gestured toward Derrick, then pointed to the knife. "They want you to take it." Emma guessed, her stomach twisting in fear. Derrick hesitated, his hand hovering over the knife. "What if it's a test?" "Don't touch it," Emma urged, grabbing his arm. But it was too late. Derrick's fingers brushed the knife's hilt, and the chanting stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening, stretching for what felt like an eternity. Then, the figures began to hum a new tune, one that was faster, sharper, and more menacing. The jungle came alive around them. The trees creaked, their branches swaying despite the absence of wind. The ground beneath their feet trembled as if something massive was stirring below. "What did you do?" Emma cried, her eyes darting around the clearing. Derrick clutched the knife tightly, his face pale. "I didn't know. Before he could finish, a deep rumble echoed from the altar. The spiral carving began to glow, its lines filling with an otherworldly blue light. The twins stumbled back as the altar seemed to rise slightly, the ground splitting around it. The masked figures fell to their knees, their hands raised in reverence. "Derrick, we have to get out of here," Emma screamed, pulling at his arm. The altar's light grew brighter, and a shape began to materialize above it, a figure made of smoke and shadows, with eyes that burned like embers. Its form was human-like but grotesquely distorted, its limbs too long and its face featureless except for the glowing eyes. "Leave," a voice boomed, deep and resonant, echoing through the clearing. "This is sacred ground." Emma and Derrick didn't wait for further instructions. They bolted into the jungle, the chanting of the figures and the booming voice fading as they ran. The twins didn't stop until they reached a familiar landmark, a large banyan tree near the villa's grounds. They collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. What just happened?" Emma panted. "I don't know," Derrick admitted, staring at the knife still clutched in his hand. The blue glow from the altar lingered faintly on its surface. "We have to tell Mom and Dad," Emma said. "No," Derrick replied firmly. "We can't. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because whatever's happening here, it's not over." By the time Emma and Derrick reached the villa, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Their parents were already awake, their faces etched with worry. "Where have you two been?" Ellis demanded, rushing toward them. Bruce followed close behind, his expression a mix of anger and relief. "You've been gone all night. We were about to send out a search party." "We're fine," Derrick said quickly, avoiding his father's eyes. "We just got a little lost." Emma glanced at her brother, unsure whether to speak up. The weight of their ordeal pressed heavily on her, but Derrick's warning echoed in her mind, "Not yet." Ellis hugged Emma tightly, her voice trembling. "Don't ever scare us like that again. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Mom," Emma murmured, guilt knotting in her stomach. As they entered the villa, Bruce turned to Mr. Harrow, who stood silently in the doorway. "We need to talk about increasing security on this island. My kids were wandering around all night, and none of your staff noticed." Harrow's face was unreadable, but his tone was calm. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. Ward. I assure you, we'll take every precaution moving forward." Emma caught the flicker of something in Harrow's eyes, unease, or perhaps fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but Derrick nudged her arm, shaking his head slightly. After a tense breakfast, the family retreated to their rooms. Emma followed Derrick into his, shutting the door behind her. "We have to tell them," she said in a hushed voice. "No," Derrick insisted. He sat on the edge of his bed, the bone knife resting on the nightstand. "They won't believe us. And even if they do, what are they going to do? Fight those things?" Emma stared at the knife, its faint blue glow still pulsing rhythmically. "We need to get rid of that." "I tried," Derrick admitted. "I threw it into the jungle, but it came back." Emma's eyes widened. "What do you mean, it came back?" Derrick picked up the knife, turning it over in his hands. "I tossed it as far as I could, and when I got back to the villa, it was on my bed. It won't leave me." A chill ran down Emma's spine. "This is bad, Derrick. Really bad." Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Harrow entered, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness. "I need to speak with you," he said, his gaze fixed on the knife. Derrick quickly hid the blade behind his back. "About what?" Harrow stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You went into the forbidden jungle, didn't you?" Emma's stomach churned. "We didn't mean to," she admitted. "We got lost." Harrow's expression hardened. "And now you've brought that back with you." He pointed to the knife, his tone sharp. "What is it?" Derrick demanded. "Why is it following me?" Harrow hesitated, glancing toward the door as if to ensure no one was listening. It's a relic of the island's past. A weapon used in rituals to summon the spirit that protects this land. By touching it, you've awakened something that should never have been disturbed. Emma's voice trembled. Why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you tell us the truth? Harrow's jaw tightened. Because your father owns this island now. He doesn't care about the history, only about profit. And you're paying the price for his arrogance. Derrick stood abruptly. How do we stop it? Harrow sighed, his shoulders sagging. You can't. The spirit has already marked you. The only way to end this is to return the knife to the altar and perform the ritual to seal the spirit again. Emma's hands shook. And what happens if we fail? Harrow's eyes were cold. Then no one leaves this island alive. The room fell silent as Harrow's words hung in the air. Emma felt a cold dread creeping over her, while Derrick tightened his grip on the knife. We have to do the ritual, Derrick said finally, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Emma turned to him, panic flashing across her face. We don't even know how to perform it. What if we make it worse? Harrow stepped forward, his tone urgent. I can help you. The ritual is complex, but the markings on the knife and the altar will guide us. We must do this before nightfall, before the spirit grows too powerful. Emma's heart raced. Why can't your staff help us? Why does it have to be us? Harrow hesitated, then spoke quietly. The spirit marks those who disturb its sacred ground. You are the ones it seeks. My staff, we dare not interfere. The island's curse is something we've lived with for generations. So, we're on our own, Derrick said bitterly. Harrow shook his head. Not entirely. I'll provide you with what you need, a map, supplies, and guidance. But once you step back into the jungle, you'll be on your own. Emma clenched her fists, fear warring with determination. Fine. But if we do this, we're doing it together. Harrow nodded solemnly. There's no other way. By midday, Derrick and Emma stood at the edge of the jungle, their backpacks loaded with supplies Harrow had provided, a map of the island, a flashlight, rope, and a pouch of herbs he claimed were crucial for the ritual. Bruce and Ellis had been suspicious when Harrow suggested a guided hike for the twins, but they reluctantly agreed after his reassurance that it would be safe. If anything happens to them, Bruce had warned Harrow, you'll answer to me. Harrow simply bowed his head. I understand. Now, as the jungle loomed before them, Emma swallowed hard. Are you sure about this, Derrick? No, he admitted, gripping the knife tightly. But we don't have a choice. The twins stepped into the jungle, the dense canopy swallowing the sunlight and plunging them into a shadowy green world. Every rustle of leaves and distant bird calls set Emma on edge. She clutched the map, her fingers trembling. According to Harrow, the altar is at the center of the jungle, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Derrick nodded. Let's move fast. The less time we spend here, the better. As they trekked deeper, the jungle seemed to shift around them, the path twisting and narrowing in ways that defied logic. Emma checked the map repeatedly, growing increasingly frustrated. This doesn't make sense, she muttered. The map says we should have reached the clearing by now. Derrick paused, glancing around. The air felt heavier, the sounds of the jungle fading into an unnatural silence. We're close, he said, his voice low. I can feel it. Emma gave him a wary look. What do you mean? Derrick hesitated, then admitted, ever since I touched the knife, it's like. I don't know. Like I'm connected to it. It's pulling me toward the altar. Emma shivered. That's not comforting, Derrick. They pressed on, following Derrick's instincts. Soon, the jungle opened into the clearing they had stumbled upon the night before. The altar stood at its center, the carvings glowing faintly in the dim light. Derrick approached cautiously, the knife in hand. Now what? Emma pulled the pouch of herbs from her backpack and opened it. The scent was sharp and earthy, almost overwhelming. She sprinkled the herbs onto the altar as Harrow had instructed. Derrick placed the knife in the center of the spiral carving. The glowing lines flared brighter, and the air around them seemed to hum with energy. Emma pulled out the piece of paper where Harrow had written the ritual incantation. Her voice trembled as she began to read the strange words aloud. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and the jungle came alive with movement. Shadows twisted and swirled around them, forming the vague shape of the spirit they had seen the night before. Its ember-like eyes burned brightly, fixed on Derrick. The spirit's voice boomed, shaking the trees. You seek to undo what has been awakened. Derrick stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We're returning what we took. Leave us and the island in peace. The spirit laughed, a deep, guttural sound that sent shivers down Emma's spine. Peace. Your kind knows nothing of peace. You come to take, to destroy, to claim what is not yours. Why should I spare you? Emma's voice broke as she continued the incantation, tears streaming down her face. The spirit lunged toward her, but the glowing carvings on the altar flared, forcing it back. Derrick grabbed the knife and held it aloft. If we finish the ritual, you'll be sealed again. Isn't that what you want? The spirit paused, its form flickering. Finish it, if you can. The jungle roared to life, the shadows twisting and closing in as the spirit launched its final attack. The jungle erupted into chaos. Trees groaned as if alive, their branches clawing toward Emma and Derrick. The spirit's massive, shadowy form loomed over the altar, its ember-like eyes blazing with fury. Emma clutched the incantation, her voice trembling as she tried to keep reading. Vivisato sum, lumen clausum. The spirit roared, and a gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering the herbs and nearly ripping the paper from Emma's hands. She staggered back, shielding her face as Derrick stood firm, the knife glowing brighter in his grasp. Keep going, Emma. Derrick shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Emma steadied herself and continued, her voice growing louder despite her fear. Lumen clausum. Spirito redite ad locum sacrum. The glowing carvings on the altar flared again, sending pulses of light into the surrounding jungle. The spirit recoiled, its form distorting as if caught in an invisible storm. You think you can bind me again, the spirit snarled, its voice resonating in their very bones. Your bloodline has already tainted this land. Your kind will never leave here alive. Derrick stepped forward, gripping the knife tightly. We didn't ask for any of this. But if you want to fight, then fine, fight me. Derrick, no. Emma screamed, her heart lurching. The spirit lunged, its shadowy arms reaching for Derrick. But as it neared, the knife in his hand exploded with light, forming a protective barrier around him. The spirit recoiled, its shriek of pain echoing through the clearing. Emma continued the incantation, her voice steady now. Lumen clausum. Spirito redite ad locum sacrum. Spirito redite. The spirit twisted and lashed out, sending a tendril of shadow toward her. Emma screamed as it wrapped around her leg, pulling her off her feet. Emma! Derrick shouted. He leaped toward her, slashing at the shadow with the glowing knife. The tendril evaporated, and Emma scrambled to her feet, clutching the paper tightly. We have to finish this together, Derrick said, his voice urgent. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. They approached the altar side by side, Derrick holding the knife while Emma read the final lines of the incantation. Lumen clausum. Sacramentum finitum est. The altar's carvings blazed with an intense light, blinding them momentarily. The spirit screamed, its form unraveling as the light consumed it. The jungle fell silent, the oppressive energy dissipating in an instant. When Emma and Derrick opened their eyes, the spirit was gone. The altar's glow faded, leaving behind the faint carvings etched into the stone. "Is it over?" Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. Derrick stared at the knife in his hand. The once glowing blade was now dull and lifeless. "I think so." The twins sat in silence, their exhaustion overwhelming. The jungle around them was still, as if the island itself was catching its breath. "Do you think the spirit's really gone?" Emma asked after a long pause. Derrick looked at the altar, then at the knife. "I don't know. But we did everything Harrow said. If it comes back, we'll be ready." Emma shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Let's just get out of here." They retraced their steps, guided by the map and the faint light of dawn breaking through the canopy. When they emerged from the jungle, the villa stood waiting for them, a surreal reminder of the world they had left behind. Harrow was waiting on the veranda, his expression unreadable. As the twins approached, he gave a slight nod. "Did you succeed?" he asked quietly. Derrick held up the knife. "It's done." Harrow's shoulders sagged in relief. "You've done something many would not have dared. This island may finally know peace." Emma frowned. "And what about us? Are we safe?" Harrow's gaze was heavy as he replied. "That depends. The spirit has been sealed, but its mark lingers. You must leave this island and never return." Derrick and Emma exchanged a glance. "Trust me," Derrick said. "We're not coming back." As the family prepared to leave the island, Bruce and Ellis remained blissfully unaware of the horrors their children had faced. Emma and Derrick said nothing, choosing to keep the experience between them. As their boat pulled away from the dock, Emma glanced back at the island. The jungle loomed dark and still, but something in the air felt different, lighter, freer. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Derrick didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the now lifeless knife. Turning it over in his hands, he finally said, "I hope so." But as the island faded into the horizon, neither of them noticed the faint glow that flickered across the blade, just for a moment. The boat cut through the calm waters as the family left the island behind, the twins sitting in silence at the back of the vessel. Bruce and Ellis chatted animatedly about their plans for returning to normal life, completely unaware of the ordeal Derrick and Emma had endured. Emma stared at the horizon, her hands gripping the railing tightly. She felt like she was leaving a part of herself behind on that cursed island, a part she wasn't sure she wanted to reclaim. "Are you okay?" Derrick asked, leaning closer. Emma glanced at him, her face pale and drawn. "I don't know. It feels like it's not over." Derrick hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the knife. Its once glowing blade was now dull, but there was an unsettling weight to it, as though it still held a fragment of the spirit's power. "Why do you still have that?" Emma hissed, her eyes wide. "You should have left it there." "I tried," Derrick admitted. "But every time I put it down, it felt wrong. Like it needed to come with me." Emma's stomach churned. "Derrick, this isn't just some souvenir. What if it's still connected to the spirit? What if it—" She was cut off by the sudden roar of the boat's engine sputtering. The vessel lurched, causing everyone to grab onto something for support. "What's going on?" Bruce called to the captain. The captain, an older man with a weathered face, frowned as he fiddled with the controls. "Not sure, sir. The engine's acting up." Ellis clung to the railing, her voice tight with concern. "Is it serious? We're in the middle of nowhere." The captain muttered under his breath, checking the gauges. "Shouldn't be. The fuel tank's full, and we did maintenance before we left." Derrick and Emma exchanged a worried glance. "It's the knife," Emma whispered. It's cursing us. That's ridiculous, Derrick said, though his voice lacked conviction. The captain managed to restart the engine, but the boat's progress slowed considerably. The once smooth journey became choppy, with the vessel pitching and rolling on increasingly rough waters. Emma gripped Derrick's arm. I think the spirit's still with us. Derrick shook his head, though his hand hovered protectively over the knife. No. We sealed it. Harrow said it's done. Then why does this keep happening? As night fell, the boat's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows over the deck. The sea had calmed, but an oppressive stillness hung in the air, broken only by the lapping of waves against the hull. The family gathered below deck for dinner, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Ellis poured herself a glass of wine while Bruce told a story about a deal he'd struck at work. Emma and Derrick sat silently, their plates untouched. Are you two still sulking? Bruce asked, his tone light. Come on, the trip wasn't that bad. Emma looked up sharply. It was worse than bad, Dad. You have no idea what we went through. Emma, Derrick said quietly, but she ignored him. You think you can just buy an island, build a vacation home, and ignore the people who were here before us? You don't even care about what you destroyed. Bruce frowned. What are you talking about? There was nothing on that island. There was everything, Emma snapped. People, history, rituals, things you don't understand. You shouldn't have brought us there. The room fell silent. Ellis opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden creak from above stopped her. What was that? She asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Derrick tensed, his hand instinctively moving to his pocket. The creaking grew louder, followed by a series of sharp thuds. Bruce stood, his face pale. Stay here. I'll check it out. No. Emma blurted, grabbing his arm. Don't go out there. Bruce chuckled nervously. Come on, Emma. It's probably just the wind. He climbed the stairs to the deck, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, the boat rocked violently, sending dishes and glasses crashing to the floor. What the hell is happening? Ellis cried, clutching the table for support. Derrick pulled out the knife, its blade faintly glowing in the dim light. It's the spirit. It followed us. Emma stared at the blade, her blood running cold. What do we do? Before Derrick could answer, Bruce stumbled back down the stairs, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. There's something out there, he whispered. Bruce collapsed into a chair, his breathing ragged. Ellis rushed to his side, her face pale with worry. What do you mean, something out there? She asked, her voice trembling. Bruce shook his head, struggling to form words. It's not possible. It looked like smoke, but it moved, like it was alive. And the eyes, those eyes. Derrick's grip tightened around the knife as he exchanged a fearful glance with Emma. It's the spirit, he said grimly. It's not done with us. Ellis turned to him, her expression incredulous. What are you talking about? This is insane. Emma's voice was firm. Mom, listen to me. We woke something up on that island. Something ancient and angry. And it's following us. Ellis opened her mouth to argue, but a loud crash from above silenced her. The boat lurched violently, knocking everyone off balance. We need to go out there, Derrick said, standing. Are you crazy? Emma hissed, grabbing his arm. We don't even know what we're dealing with. I know it's not going to stop unless we do something, Derrick shot back. He held up the knife, its faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. This is connected to it. If we can figure out how to use it, maybe we can stop it. Emma's stomach twisted, but she nodded reluctantly. Fine. But we're not splitting up. Bruce and Ellis stayed below deck as the twins climbed the stairs, stepping cautiously onto the deck. The night was eerily calm, the moon casting an otherworldly glow over the sea. At first, everything seemed still. The boat rocked gently on the waves, and the air was cool and quiet. But then, a shadow moved near the bow. "There," Emma whispered, pointing. The shadow coalesced into a familiar shape, a figure of smoke and shadows, its ember-like eyes glowing in the darkness. It hovered above the deck, its form shifting and writhing as though it couldn't maintain a solid shape. "You dare to escape me," the spirit's voice boomed, reverberating through the air. "You cannot run from what you've unleashed." Derrick stepped forward, holding the knife aloft. "We sealed you. You're supposed to be gone." The spirit laughed, a deep, menacing sound. "The seal was broken the moment you brought the blade with you. You are bound to it, and to me." Emma grabbed Derrick's arm, her voice trembling. "What does it want?" "I want justice," the spirit hissed. "For the land you've desecrated, the lives you've stolen. You think you can take and destroy without consequence? You are wrong. We didn't know." Emma cried. "We didn't mean to." "Your ignorance does not absolve you," the spirit snarled, surging toward them. Derrick raised the knife instinctively, and the blade flared with light, forcing the spirit to retreat. It roared in frustration, the sound rattling the boat. "What do we do?" Emma yelled. Derrick gritted his teeth. "We have to use the knife. It's the only thing that can hurt it." The spirit lunged again, and Derrick swung the blade, slashing through the smoky tendrils. The light from the knife burned the spirit, causing it to recoil with a furious scream. Emma grabbed the map from her pocket, her hands shaking. "Harrow said the knife is part of the ritual. There has to be a way to finish this." As the spirit circled them, Derrick and Emma huddled together, scanning the map for clues. The markings on the knife matched symbols drawn on the map, a spiral surrounded by jagged lines. "It's another seal," Derrick realized. "We need to recreate it." "But how?" Emma asked desperately. Derrick pointed to the deck. "There's enough space here. Use the chalk." Emma fumbled for the piece of chalk Harrow had given them, dropping to her knees and frantically drawing the spiral symbol on the wooden deck. The spirit surged toward them again, its fury palpable. Derrick stepped in front of Emma, slashing at the tendrils of shadow as she worked. "Faster, Emma," he shouted. "I'm trying," she snapped, her heart pounding. When the symbol was complete, Emma sprinkled the remaining herbs over it, just as they had on the altar. Derrick stepped into the center of the spiral, holding the knife above his head. "Now what?" Emma yelled. "Read the incantation," Derrick said. Emma pulled out the crumpled paper and began to chant, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. The carvings on the knife flared brighter, and the symbol on the deck began to glow. The spirit shrieked, its form unraveling as the light engulfed it. "You will not escape this curse," it roared. "Your bloodline will suffer for what you've done." With one final scream, the spirit dissolved into the light, leaving the deck silent and still. The glow from the spiral faded, leaving the deck dark and eerily quiet. The twins stood frozen, their breaths coming in sharp gasps. The knife in Derrick's hand was now ice cold, its glow completely extinguished. "Is it over?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Derrick didn't answer immediately. He stared at the spot where the spirit had vanished, his grip on the knife tightening. "I think so." They both jumped as the door to the cabin burst open, and Bruce and Ellis emerged, their faces pale and alarmed. "What's going on?" Bruce demanded, his gaze darting between his children and the strange symbols on the deck. "What the hell was that noise?" Emma glanced at Derrick, unsure of how much to reveal. We stopped it," she said quietly. "Stopped what?" Ellis asked, her voice trembling. Derrick stepped forward, holding up the knife. this. It's connected to the island and, to something we woke up there. We didn't mean to, but it followed us. Bruce's face hardened. Are you saying this is because of that stupid jungle? What were you two even doing there? Dad, this isn't the time. Emma snapped. We need to figure out how to make sure it doesn't come back. Ellis's eyes widened. It could come back. Before Derrick could respond, the boat gave a sudden, violent lurch. Everyone grabbed onto something for balance as the water beneath them churned. I thought it was over, Emma whispered, fear creeping into her voice. A low rumble echoed from below the boat, and Derrick's stomach dropped. It's not the spirit, he said slowly. It's the island. Bruce frowned. What are you talking about? Emma pointed toward the horizon. Look. The island was barely visible in the distance, but the jungle appeared to be moving. Trees swayed violently as if caught in a storm, and the ground seemed to writhe and shift. It's alive, Derrick said, his voice hollow. The rumble grew louder, and the water around the boat became turbulent. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, making it hard to breathe. What's happening? Ellis cried, clutching Bruce's arm. Emma's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. The spirit said something about a curse, she said. It's not just about us, it's about the island itself. The people who lived there, they didn't leave willingly. They were driven out, and this is their revenge. Bruce's face turned red with anger. Are you saying this is my fault? I bought that island legally. I didn't know about any of this. Derrick glared at him. It doesn't matter if you knew or not. You're part of the reason this happened. Before Bruce could retort, the water around the boat began to glow faintly, pulsing with the same eerie blue light they had seen at the altar. Emma's eyes widened. It's not done with us. It's trying to pull us back. The rumble beneath them intensified, and the boat began to drift toward the island despite the engine being at full throttle. What do we do? Ellis screamed. Derrick looked at the knife, his expression grim. We have to give it back. Emma shook her head. We can't go back to the island. It'll kill us. If we don't, Derrick said firmly, it'll kill us anyway. The twins explained their plan to their parents as the boat continued its relentless drift toward the island. Bruce and Ellis were resistant, but as the glow in the water grew brighter and the boat began to groan under the strain, they reluctantly agreed. As they neared the shore, the oppressive energy in the air grew stronger. The jungle loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Stay on the boat, Derrick told their parents. We'll finish this. No way, Bruce said. I'm not letting you go in there alone. Dad, you can't help us, Emma said. This is our responsibility. Bruce hesitated but finally nodded, pulling Ellis close as the twins disembarked. The jungle was eerily silent as Emma and Derrick retraced their steps to the altar. The knife grew warmer in Derrick's hand with every step, as if guiding them. When they reached the clearing, the altar glowed faintly, its carvings pulsing with a life of their own. Here goes nothing, Derrick said, stepping forward. He placed the knife back onto the altar. Immediately, the carvings flared with light, and the air around them hummed with energy. Emma stepped back, clutching her arms. Is this going to work? The ground trembled, and the jungle came alive with a cacophony of sounds, howling wind, rustling leaves, and the faint echo of voices. A figure began to materialize above the altar, its shape familiar but less menacing than before. The spirit's ember-like eyes fixed on the twins. You return what was taken, it said, its voice quieter now. But the curse remains. Your bloodline is marked. This land will not forget. Emma's voice trembled. What do you mean? What curse? You will see, the spirit replied, its form dissolving into the light. The altar's glow faded, and the jungle fell silent once more. As the twins returned to the boat, they couldn't shake the spirit's words. The island grew smaller on the horizon as they sailed away, but the unease in their hearts remained. What did it mean by a curse? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derrick stared at the horizon, the weight of the knife's absence heavy in his hands. I don't know, he said quietly. But I don't think we've seen the last of it. The journey back to the mainland was tense, the air aboard the boat thick with unspoken fears. Bruce and Ellis remained silent, their eyes constantly darting to their children as if searching for an explanation they couldn't bring themselves to demand. Emma sat on the edge of the boat, staring at the fading horizon where the island had been. The words of the spirit echoed in her mind, "Your bloodline is marked. This land will not forget." "What do you think it meant?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Derrick leaned against the railing, his expression grim. "I think it means we'll never truly escape it." Ellis finally spoke, her voice strained. "This is ridiculous. Spirits, curses, it's like something out of a bad movie. When we get back, we'll find someone, an expert, to deal with this." Emma turned to her mother, frustration flashing in her eyes. "And what if there's no one who can help? This isn't something you can just throw money at, Mom." "Enough," Bruce said sharply, his voice cutting through the tension. "We've been through hell. Let's focus on getting home." The family arrived at their sprawling estate late that evening. The house, with its grand columns and meticulously maintained gardens, felt like a sanctuary after the horrors of the island. But the unease lingered. Emma barely touched her dinner, retreating to her room as soon as she could. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching her. Derrick, too, found sleep elusive. He paced his room, the memory of the knife's glow burned into his mind. Though they had left the knife on the island, he couldn't shake the sensation that it was still with him, its weight pressing down on his soul. Around midnight, a faint knock sounded at his door. "Come in," he said. Emma stepped inside, her face pale. "I can't sleep." "Me neither," Derrick admitted, sitting on the edge of his bed. "What if the spirit wasn't bluffing? What if the curse is real?" Emma sat beside him, hugging her knees to her chest. "I don't think it's over. It's like I can feel it. Like it's waiting." Derrick hesitated, then nodded. "Me too." The first sign came the next morning. Bruce was in his office, speaking on the phone with his attorney about the island. "Yes, I understand there's been some controversy, but the land is mine. I don't care what the locals say." The line crackled, and a loud, distorted noise burst through the receiver. Bruce jerked back, dropping the phone. "Sir. Are you there?" came the voice of his assistant. Bruce picked up the phone, his hands trembling. "What the hell was that?" The assistant sounded confused. "I didn't hear anything, sir. Are you all right?" Bruce muttered something and ended the call, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. He glanced out the window, but the gardens, bathed in sunlight, offered no answers. That afternoon, Ellis was pruning roses in the garden when she noticed something unusual. A single vine had grown across the pathway overnight, its thick, thorny branches unlike anything she'd planted. "Strange," she murmured, cutting the vine away. But as she did, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to drift through the air. She froze, looking around. "Hello." The garden was still, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Shaking her head, Ellis dismissed it as her imagination and returned to her work. By the evening, the unease had spread to the entire family. Derrick and Emma sat together in the living room, both too restless to stay in their rooms. "It's starting, isn't it?" Emma asked. Derrick nodded. "I think so. And I don't think it's going to stop." A sudden crash from the kitchen made them both jump. They rushed to investigate, finding Bruce and Ella standing in the middle of the room, staring at a shattered plate on the floor. "It just fell," Ella said, her voice shaky. "I wasn't even near it." Bruce's face was pale. "This house is solid. No drafts, no vibrations. Plates don't just fall off the counter." "It's the spirit," Derrick said quietly. Bruce turned to him, his frustration boiling over. "Enough with the spirit nonsense. You're scaring your mother." "It's not nonsense," Emma snapped. "We've been trying to tell you, this isn't over. The island cursed us, and now it's here." Ellis gripped Bruce's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Bruce, what if they're right? What if something did follow us?" Bruce shook his head, refusing to believe it. "No. I won't let this superstition ruin our lives." But as the family argued, the lights flickered, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. Emma froze, her heart pounding. "Do you hear that?" Derrick nodded, his face pale. "It's the same sound from the altar." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the room began to shift unnaturally. "Everyone, get out of here!" Derrick shouted. But before they could move, the house shook violently, throwing them all to the ground. The hum crescendoed into a deafening roar, and a familiar, chilling voice echoed through the room. The chilling voice echoed through the house, carrying with it a palpable sense of doom. Emma scrambled to her feet, her heart racing as the walls around her seemed to breathe, the shadows twisting and contorting. "Stay together!" Derrick shouted, pulling Emma toward him. Bruce and Ellis clung to each other, their faces pale with terror. "What's happening?" Ellis cried. "What does it want from us?" Emma's voice trembled. "It's the curse. It warned us this wasn't over." The air in the room grew colder, frost forming on the windows and creeping along the floor. The voice spoke again, louder and more menacing. "Your bloodline must pay for its sins." Bruce, his face twisted with fear and anger, stepped forward. "We didn't do anything. This isn't our fault." The spirit's laughter filled the room, mocking and bitter. "Your kind destroyed my home, desecrated my land. You take and destroy, leaving nothing but ruin. And now, you will know my pain." The floor beneath them cracked, and thick vines burst through, snaking toward the family. Derrick grabbed a kitchen knife, slashing at the closest one. The vines recoiled, but more appeared, creeping closer. "We have to get out of the house," Emma yelled. The family rushed toward the door, dodging the writhing vines. The moment they stepped outside, the air shifted again. The garden, once pristine and orderly, was overrun with wild, thorny plants that seemed to pulse with life. Ellis screamed as a vine lashed out, wrapping around her ankle and pulling her to the ground. "Help me!" Bruce and Derrick worked together, hacking at the vine until it released her. They pulled Ellis to her feet, but her ankle was bleeding and swollen. "We can't fight this," Bruce shouted. "We need help." Emma grabbed Derrick's arm. "What about Harrow? He knew about the curse. Maybe he can tell us how to stop it." Derrick nodded. "We'll call him." Back inside, Derrick dialed the number Harrow had given them. The line crackled, and for a moment, it seemed no one would answer. Then, Harrow's voice came through, low and urgent. "I warned you to leave the knife behind," he said. "We did," Derrick snapped. "It stayed on the island. But the curse followed us anyway." Harrow sighed heavily. "Then it's worse than I feared. The spirit's connection to your family runs deeper than I realized. Returning the knife wasn't enough, it's marked you. How do we stop it?" Emma demanded. There was a long pause. "You can't stop it," Harrow said finally. "The curse will remain until the spirit's pain is truly avenged. It's not just about returning the knife, it's about atonement. Bruce grabbed the phone, his face red with anger. Atonement? For what? I didn't do anything to that damn island. Harrow's voice was cold. It doesn't matter if you were the one who swung the axe or signed the papers. Your bloodline reaps what it sows. The line went dead, leaving the family in stunned silence. The house grew darker with each passing hour, the oppressive energy intensifying. Shadows moved of their own accord, and the hum of the spirit's presence never ceased. Emma sat on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest. We're never going to escape this, are we? Derrick knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll figure it out. We have to. Bruce paced the room, muttering to himself. This is ridiculous. We're not cursed. We're not cursed. Ellis sobbed quietly, her hands shaking as she clutched a family photo. The spirit's voice returned, louder than before. You have ignored my warnings. Now you will suffer as I have suffered. The house trembled, and the walls began to crack, vines spilling through. Derrick and Emma stood, their resolve hardening. We have to confront it, Derrick said. Emma nodded. It's the only way. The twins returned to the center of the house, where the spirit's presence was strongest. Emma clutched the herbs they had saved from the island, while Derrick carried a flashlight and a makeshift weapon, a metal pipe from the garage. The room grew colder as they entered, and the spirit materialized before them, its ember-like eyes blazing with hatred. Why do you resist? It snarled. You cannot escape your fate. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. We're not here to escape. We're here to make things right. The spirit paused, its form flickering. Right? You think you can undo centuries of pain? No, Derrick said. But we can try. Emma scattered the herbs on the ground, reciting the incantation Harrow had taught them. The spirit roared, its form twisting as the herbs burned, filling the air with a sharp, acrid scent. You cannot banish me, it growled. Your blood is tainted. The curse will live on. We'll atone. Emma shouted, her voice breaking. Tell us how. The spirit hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing. You would sacrifice yourselves. If that's what it takes, Derrick said, his grip tightening on the pipe. The spirit leaned closer, its voice a low hiss. Then prove it. The twins glanced at each other, their fear mingled with determination. They stepped into the circle of vines, their hearts pounding. The spirit reached toward them, its shadowy arms wrapping around their bodies. Emma closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But instead of pain, she felt a strange warmth, as if the spirit were searching her soul. You speak the truth, it said. But your atonement will not end here. The curse will sleep, for now. But your descendants will carry this burden until my people's memory is restored. The vines withdrew, and the spirit began to fade, its form dissolving into the air. As the room fell silent, the house seemed to breathe again. The oppressive energy lifted, and the twins collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The family gathered in the living room, their faces drawn and weary. Is it over? Ellis asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For now, Derrick said. Bruce sat heavily in a chair, his face pale. We need to sell the island. Burn the deeds, erase every trace of it. Emma shook her head. It's not that simple, Dad. The curse isn't tied to the island anymore, it's tied to us. The family sat in heavy silence, the weight of the spirit's final words hanging over them.